I want to talk a little about social engineering. I know you do anyway. What do you mean by it? Explain your definition of social engineering.
Well, with social engineering, the best definitions or the best information can be found in the old Art of Deception book. But real quickly, it's basically where the bad guy uses manipulation, deception, and influence tactics. I'm talking about the same influence tactics that sales and marketing people use.
Yes.
To persuade or to influence, rather, a trusted person inside a company to either reveal information or to do some sort of action item that lets the bad guy in or gives the bad guy the information. It's simply the art of getting a person to say yes, to comply with a request, and this request is what benefits the bad guy.
Give me an example.
A guy walks into a building of a company, and during the day when the receptionist is quite busy,
yes,
walks up to the receptionist maybe 10 minutes after sitting down. The person's dressed in a suit, so the person has that authority. Looks like a typical businessman or woman.
Probably a briefcase.
Immaculate hairstyle.
Yeah.
Typical, the trappings of a business person.
Yes.
Hands the receptionist a $5 bill and says, "Excuse me, miss, I found this money was on the floor over there, and I just wanted to turn it in." and the receptionist is very surprised and says, "Okay, well, thank you so much." And then the person sits down. 15 or 20 minutes later, the person goes back up to the same receptionist and says, "Listen, I just got an important SMS message or phone call. I need to get something off my computer. I need to be able to sit down somewhere. Is it possible I could just use the conference room behind you just for 10 or 15 minutes? If anybody comes in, I won't bother you. I'd really, really appreciate it because I need to get this taken care of."
Yes.
The receptionist knows that only employees are supposed to be in that conference room, but she thinks, she's attributed, she's given a positive attribution of trust to this person based on the person turning in the $5 bill that they found on the floor. So she's thinking about it, and she goes, "Well, sure, I can trust this person." So he lets the guy into the conference room. The guy plugs in the laptop into an Ethernet jack in the conference room because most companies have their network connectivity for conferences, of course. Finds it's a live jack behind the company's firewall. Person plants a wireless access point, wireless access point being a device that fits about the size in the palm of your hand, plugs in the wireless access point into this Ethernet jack, puts a note on the wireless access point, "Please do not remove information security department." And then from the parking lot with a directional antenna, of course. The bad guy has complete access to the company from the parking lot over radio.
This is a modern grift. This is grifting, Kevin.
Exactly. Well, social engineering is basically
grifting.
Using card artistry and using technical...
It's grifting.
Well, grifting is more... No, grifting, when you look at grifting art, it's more of you're grifting for cash. You're basically conning people out of money.
Well, hey, baby, what you just described ends up in the same place. It's a modern grift. That's what it is.
I think the definitions are different. Social engineering is where the bad guy or the hacker is getting access to company information or company resources by influencing people and using and exploiting technical vulnerability.
A rose by any other name. It's still a grift. All right. So anyway, I get the picture. I get how it's done, and that's pretty awful.
I mean, a quick other story. Imagine you're at Premier Radio Networks in Sherman Oaks, and that's quite a building, if you've ever been there. And imagine that you're on the elevator.
I have never been there.
Oh, okay.
Is that amazing or what?
Yeah. Well, not really. You're outside the state, so. I was there a few times. So anyway,
I'm sure they're happy to hear that.
But I did do what I'm going to tell you.
I bet they're all checking their Ethernet ports right now for little notes.
Little notes, property of Premier Security, right? So listen to this. Imagine you're in the elevator in the restroom and you find a CD, like in a red jewel case. And it has the logo of Premier Radio Networks on there. And you look at it, you found it on the elevator, someone must have dropped it, and it says, "Extremely proprietary and confidential payroll salary history, second quarter 2005.
Oh, God.
right?
Yeah.
What are the chances that somebody, that was in the elevator or whomever is going to take that back to their computer and just do a quick check? What do their bosses make? What do their colleagues make? They put in the CD. It comes up with like an Excel document. They click on it, and nothing happens. It says it's corrupted or whatever.
They
So they
forget
either
it.
toss the CD or they give it to human resources.
Yeah, they say, what a bunch of bull, somebody's
Right.
stupid joke. But what
happens is, what do? Well, after clicking that document, it installed a piece of malicious software on their computer that can essentially do anything the bad guy wants. That's because under Windows, usually everyone runs with administrator rights.
Good God, this is diabolical.
Right, so then you have a keystroke logger that's sitting there, basically installed a wiretap on the victim's computer that clicked on that spreadsheet, or worse yet, it's a program that attempts to connect out from that person's computer to the internet to another machine, another computer that the bad guy had compromised, so now they could use that as a tunnel into Premier Radio Network's network.
What idiot let you into our building?
I would call him no, he's not an idiot, but David Hall let me into your building.
David Hall! I stand by my statement.
No, but he's a good guy. He's not an idiot.
David's all right.
Yeah, he's cool.
Oh, God, I know they're doing some thinking down there right now.
So there's an example of a social engineering attack, which is a little bit different. It's actually influencing the target by getting access to something that they'd really like to look at, and by doing so, getting them to install malicious software on their computer that gives the bad guy an advantage.
It also can come forth in ways that are much more profound and in some ways premonitory. And this is where things get misinterpreted. I've collected more than a few examples of young people with autism who are throwing what gets interpreted as a tantrum while out driving with their family in a car. And it gets to such a point that the family has to pull to the side of the road until that child is able to tame and refine his or her experience in the moment. And then once everybody's composed, they get back on the road again, only to discover that down the road a mile or two, there was a really bad multi-car accident that the family would have been involved in had they not pulled to the side of the road.
And a premonition of bad stuff, in addition to that, I mean, long-term, down the road?
One of the examples in the first book that I gave of called Autism and the God Connection, there was a young fella who, in the weeks prior to September 11th, 2001, kept drawing a series of clocks, and the clocks were all set to 9/11. Now, how would we interpret that or know that it had relevance to September 11th, 2001? I don't know. He was also drawing images of a fireball in the sky over a wooded area and buildings on fire and so forth. And I think that, again, when we don't presume intellect in individuals with autism, we can overlook or dismiss a lot of things when we should be paying more attention to the signs and signals and communications that are coming through in ways other than verbal, because verbal doesn't work for everybody.
You talk about animal examples where autistics seem to have a real connection with animals. Can you provide some examples of that? And I know in one of the books, I don't remember if it's the Autism Prophecies in particular, you single out dolphins and mention how, dolphins are intelligent. They've been on Earth a lot longer than humans. They've been intelligent on Earth a lot longer than humans. And the presumption could be if that they have these abilities as well.
Mm-hmm. I think that all animals do. And I think that every human being does also. I just think that in persons on the autism spectrum who are inherently gentle and exquisitely sensitive, they may be more apt to tap that aspect of their personality in ways that are more ready than the average person. Where the dolphins are concerned, there was a woman that I know who actually has a dolphin sanctuary, and she invites families of people with autism to come and swim with the dolphins. And she gave me a gorgeous story that I'd like to share with our listeners this evening.
Sure.
About a little fellow who really didn't speak for having that neurological blip, misfire, and disconnect that I spoke of earlier. And he was just so elated and so invigorated in swimming with the dolphins and looked so forward to doing this. And one of the trainers was in the water with him, and this fella just had such a glow about him and such an exuberance. And the trainer said to him, "What did the dolphin say to you?" And he spoke, and he blurted out the word love. And this is typical of what I'm hearing about interactions that people with autism are having with animals.
Give me an example of a case where, for example, it was unseen, but there remained some physical evidence that we could,
Okay. Well, one of the cases I go into occurred in 1948. And, of course, as we know, the abduction phenomenon did not really become a public issue or known, really, anywhere around the world in any great depth until the Betty and Barney Hill case came to light in 1966.
Right.
It occurred in 61. But we're talking now 48. This is 1 year after Roswell. And in that particular case, the woman I was dealing with was a very young child at the time, and she and her brother were put down for naps in their bedroom in the middle of the afternoon in Cincinnati, Ohio, by their mother, who I've had been able to interview upon several occasions too. Mm-hmm. And what the mother and everyone recalled consciously, and I should point out incidentally that the central figure in this case, the woman who I have given a Sioux name to, has had many, many abduction experiences the rest of her life, all kinds of issues. This is one that she didn't bring up to me at first because she didn't know what to make of it, and she couldn't remember the content of the abduction consciously. But what she did remember consciously, and her mother well remembered, is that the mother put them to bed in their little bedroom on the second floor of a building, really in the suburbs of Cincinnati. The next thing the mother knew was that somebody came tearing up the stairs saying that the children were outside on the ground at the basement of the cellar steps, her children, both of them, and that they must have fallen out the window. Huh. The mother went panicked, went tearing downstairs, and this central figure remembered that she sort of woke up and she couldn't move. She was lying on top of her brother at the foot of these basement steps, which incidentally were not underneath any of the windows from the bedroom.
Right.
They had no memory of falling. They were both paralyzed and unable to speak. They were rushed to the hospital by a totally panicked mother and examined, and though they had fallen in effect because of the basement steps where they were found on cement, they had fallen 3 stories. There was not a mark on either one of them. Mm-hmm. Nothing that had done any kind of damage, and yet they both remembered consciously floating out the window, and some kind of huge shadow over the house, and they couldn't remember exactly what happened consciously, but the point is that the doctor and everyone else, of course, involved said there's no possible way these children could have fallen 3 stories onto cement, which would have meant they would have had to have fallen at a diagonal instead of straight down.
Yes.
Without, actually, there's a very serious possibility that they would have been absolutely killed. They could not have survived it, let alone not have a mark on them. Under hypnosis, the entire experience came up. The woman described their being floated out the window, she and her little brother, and lifted up into the craft, and then when the experience was over, they were put down at this basement steps, and the brother remembers floating out the window. He doesn't remember, he does not want to undergo hypnosis, etc. But anyway, the basic point of all this is that there's a great deal of material about this in the book. The point is that this happened in broad daylight in the middle of a suburban area with stores and buildings and everything around. Nobody saw a UFO. Nobody saw children come out a window, floating or falling or otherwise. Nobody heard any screams. There was no energy, kind of injury to any of the people involved. And that's the kind of case which implies invisibility, and yet we have cases we deal with in the book where it becomes a much more tangible thing. For instance,
okay, we'll get to that in a second. I'm curious. That was a long time ago. Has there been any follow-up with these children since then?
Well, of course, I've been working with the mother, who is now in her 50s, and she has a child, 2 children actually, who are seemingly having abduction experiences from time to time, as if they are part of this ongoing kind of study of a particular bloodline. The brother, who is now a man in his late 50s, does not want to look into this and is still suffering from a great deal of fear connected with his memory of that time of being paralyzed. When they were picked up and taken to the hospital, rushed to the hospital, they only regained the ability to move and speak over a period of between a half an hour and an hour. And again, there was no physical mark on them, no explanation of why they could not speak and why their bodies were paralyzed.
That's remarkable. I know this is a shot in the dark, quite literally, pun intended, I suppose, about the inner Earth, but I recall Ed once saying that there were some, well, perhaps machines that were coming to life under the surface of Mars, and I've very long been fascinated, as you know, with the inner Earth, and tonight we had a story. Incidentally, I depend on all of you for these weird and unusual stories, and that's where I get them. You send them to me. So if you run into a story, the magnitude of the one I had tonight, for example, of the drilling and then the plan to go to the very center of the Earth, a real plan to do that, send them to me. ArtBell at AOL.com or ArtBell at Mindspring.com. But it occurred to me that either as a future project or one perhaps that Ed has already, researched at some point in the past, we're all curious about what's inside the Earth, Ed. Have you ever looked?
Only in terms of extraterrestrial involvement. That's it. Nothing else.
Huh. With regard to Mars or Earth?
Both.
Both. And what can you tell me about ET involvement with regard to Earth?
There is extraterrestrial intelligence. There are, let's call them bases. I hate to use the mundane word, but there are operation centers in seamounts, deep in seamounts, totally inaccessible to any human, and things come and go from those seamounts.
Things come and go.
Yeah, things, actual machines.
There have been all kinds of reports of UFOs disappearing into the ocean or rising out of it. I've heard stories from people at sea, seamen, Navy guys. They will tell in hushed tones these stories of things they have seen either come or go from the sea.
Yeah, even the military team members, way back when I was operations officer, I would task viewers and take a look at myself at some of these comings and goings, and the actual stopping points are in seamounts, very, very deep in the earth.
Huh.
So because there's no access, that is not one of the things I chose to use in terms of contact. I used a different tact.
Oh.
Yeah. Because, there's no access there. You can describe it, but I want the real thing.
All right. It's something called Vanguard ET Contact Attempt, and that's coming, in August in North America?
It is. In fact, if that's successful, and there's every reason to believe that it should be after doing this for 20 years, and if that's successful, I'm going to bring back a very prominent person to do the filming, and then I'm going to invite you to be there as a witness to it.
Huh. What exactly is involved?
Watching. Just watching. That's all. They put on the show and interact, and you watch.
So
it's a wild card. We're not sure what's going to go down, but we are sure that the location is correct. And where the genesis of this was a lot of work looking at this incident that happened in September 16th of 1994, the one that the late John Mack wrote about the children, the school children.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Yes.
In terms of chain of custody, to know what agency we were dealing with, I use the term agency loosely. A lot of your listeners are going to hear that term, and they're going to think what you and I both know they're going to think. By agency, I mean extraterrestrial or non-human agency or interdimensional agency. Whoever orchestrated that or staged that particular appearance at the Ariel school outside of Harare, Zimbabwe.
Yes.
Whoever did that, that's what we locked on to find out where we could contact that agency, where using a higher intelligence, in this case remote viewing, could link up with another higher intelligence. And we found 2 locations on the planet Earth, and one of them is in North America, not too far from where you live, but
really?
Far enough where you'd have to get a long drive or get on a plane.
Huh.
But I'll take care of that for you.
So you're saying there's going to be an incident or something that can be viewed that would be
Ground truth.
How much of an incident are we talking about? Are we talking about sightings of a vehicle? Are we talking about a landing or an actual ET presence?
The sightings thing, well, the sightings idea that I used to lead scientific teams in the Southwest, particularly in New Mexico, and we've got that. We've got that down. We've got the photographs. We've got all the measurements in terms of artifacts of, let's say, propulsion. I use that term loosely. We've done all those studies, and we've gotten flybys, actual flybys. But we're after the same thing minimally, or something unknown, minimally what those children had, and that is a CE3. We're talking about a face-to-face coffee clash and nothing less. Now, what will actually happen, we don't know. But the area is just brilliant in terms of their selection of where we should go to be. It is a brilliant, brilliant selection.
Do you want to say where?
No, I cannot at this juncture. Perhaps on another show. I'll tell you privately, but I don't want to broadcast that. The last time I talked about the hot zone in America, that zone which was on a national park got overrun with joy seekers. And,
did it really?
Yes, it did.
I was not aware of that, Ed. But I guess
National Park Service was not really happy with me.
Are there recent cases of corpses coming back to life? I didn't even know there were historical cases of corpses coming back to life, much less recent ones.
Oh, yes. The reason I got this interest in it was because of something that I had read in the Boston Globe a couple of years ago about a young woman who was found dead in her bathtub in her apartment.
Yes.
The fire and rescue people came and said, yep, she looks dead, and they found some pills, and it appeared she had an overdose.
Oh.
And they called the state police, and they came and said it looked like it was an accidental overdose. So they zipped her into a body bag and sent her to a morgue, and a couple hours later she woke up and actually ended up being just fine. And I read that story, and it just gave me the chills. You know, I'm always paying attention to what scares me.
Well, yes, I know. But how could they? I mean, there are certain minimal steps one takes in deciding whether somebody's actually dead, and sending someone to the morgue is such a Ward X. It
seems like a final decision, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Well, there were a couple things in this particular case that made it difficult for them, and I completely understand how easy it is to misdiagnose death.
Really?
In this case, she was lying in a cold bathtub, so it was very hard to feel her pulse. She was probably very vasoconstricted. You could not feel her pulse. And she had taken an overdose of some kind of medication. It wasn't mentioned in the news article, which may have depressed her respiration, so they really couldn't see that she was breathing. And it turns out that this is not that unusual.
Where did she actually wake up?
She woke up inside the body bag.
In a body bag?
Yes.
That would be so disturbing.
It would be very disturbing.
Maybe not as bad as in the freezer at the morgue, but bad.
I want to tell you an even worse case.
Oh, well.
You knew I was coming to this, didn't you?
Probably, yes.
Yes. Well, there was a case in 1984 of a man who was brought to the morgue and was about to be autopsied.
Oh.
Yes. The pathologist actually picked up his scalpel and was about to make the first cut when the corpse woke up.
Oh.
And grabbed him by the throat.
Oh.
And the doctor keeled over dead.
Oh.
The patient was fine.
The patient was fine.
The patient was fine.
I can understand the doctor keeling over dead. Oh, God. That's got to be the worst nightmare for
a doctor, yes. But this is recent. I'm just going to give you some of these recent cases. I mean, you'd be shocked that this is still happening. There was a case in North Carolina, and this wasn't too long ago, of a young man who was hit by a car.
Hit by a car?
Hit by a car. Declared dead by the emergency medical people who came to see him. Brought to the morgue, and they opened it up, opened up his bag later on and realized he was breathing.
Huh.
And he ended up in the hospital. I don't think he's actually awakened from his coma. But here's a 4-year-old boy who was brought to the hospital, found unconscious, declared dead, and began to breathe. And he's now recovering. So it is case after case. There was one woman who was actually she was lying on the table about to be embalmed when she began to talk.
Aye.
And you can imagine how the funeral home director was a little bit shocked by that.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah. And
look, how much do we really know about death? I mean, it seems maybe like a dumb question, but apparently not enough.
Not enough. You're right. What we don't know is that it's sometimes very hard to diagnose. And I'm talking as a doctor, and I'm going to make a little confession here, all right? And when I talk to other doctors, they all say the same thing. When you are a medical resident or an intern and you're called in the middle of the night to go and pronounce somebody dead
right
in the hospital, the nurse has already decided this patient is dead.
Uh-huh.
So you're walking there, and it's maybe late at night, and you're exhausted, and you walk into the room, and there are all the relatives sitting around crying. You don't want to spend a lot of time in that room. So you maybe bend over and listen to the heart for 20 seconds, and you look, and they don't look like they're breathing, and you say, "I'm very sorry," and you walk out. And there have been a couple of times when I walked out and thought, did I listen long enough? and I have heard from many doctors who said the same thing, that there are times when they wonder whether they listened long enough.
Well, I even mean a little deeper into the question of death. For example, after we die, everything doesn't wind down, I guess, right away. And at the instant your heart stops, I mean, this is kind of like a private little horror for me, but I wonder if the dead lie there sometimes aware of the fact that they have just died. Well, key word, aware.
Oh, I don't think you have to worry too much about that, because as soon as your heart stops, the brain goes pretty fast.
How fast?
Well, you know what? If you were to interrupt circulation to your brain,
yes,
you would probably faint within 15 to 20 seconds. So stopping the heart is the same thing. You're not getting any circulation into the brain. The brain is a big consumer of energy, of the body's energy, and it really requires constant blood flow to stay conscious.
So we're really, really, really sure that people who have just died aren't hearing some few little things around them and have some final flashes of consciousness. We know that, huh?
Well, you know what? I haven't been on the other side, so I can't really tell you. But I would suspect that within 20 seconds you were not aware of anything.
I hope you're right.
I think I mean, as opposed to when we were talking last time about having your head cut off, I think you would have 20 seconds of awareness.
Well, that's way too long.
That's way too long.
Way too long in a basket.
Yeah, in that particular situation, that would be way too long.
But during an otherwise normal death, you wouldn't think that would be.
No, I think you probably lose consciousness, certainly after your heart stopped, but even before, because as the heart is failing, it's not pumping as strongly, and you're going to, you know how it is to black out when you start to, your blood pressure goes down and
sure,
things get a little fuzzy. That's you're not going to notice anything. So I wouldn't worry about that, but what I would worry about is being declared prematurely dead when you're not, and waking up in a situation that is not too pleasant.
Well, a bag's bad. A freezer is worse.
And, you know, historically, some people have woken up in their graves, which is probably the worst of all.
Oh, God. So if we actually know that some people have awakened in their graves, what a horrible thing to come. I mean, how many do we, most of them, we wouldn't know about? And in fact, how do we even know about people who woke up actually in graves?
Well, when the tombs are reopened, sometimes to put in new bodies, they will find evidence that the people in there were not dead.
Oh, good Lord. Scratching.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes. There was a case of, unfortunately, in the 1800s of a young girl who died of diphtheria, and she was interred in the family's tomb. And later on, when they reopened the tomb to put somebody else in, they found her corpse lying by the door.
Oh, God.
So she had not died, and there have been cases. I mean, it's really unpleasant, but it goes to the heart of what so many of us are terrified of. I think that's why Edgar Allan Poe chose to use this topic. It's because in the old days and we didn't embalm people back then. You weren't always certain.
Well, hey, forget the old days. I'm concerned today.
Hello.
Hi. What is your first name? Your first name?
Mary.
Mary. Okay, Mary. You know what this is all about now. You have had actual physical contact, Mary, with an alien?
Well, many times, but this is something that's very unusual. About 2 months ago, I had an alien actually enter into my body while I was fully awake, 7 o'clock at night, my family around. I mean, my husband saw me. It was bizarre.
When this event occurred, Mary, were you conscious of what was happening to you?
Totally conscious.
Totally conscious.
I was getting ready to watch Dateline, and I had all this energy flowing through my body, and I looked up, and I could see 3 aliens, the Greys, standing there, and they're actually in a beam of light.
Okay.
And they just showed themselves for a second, and about 15, 20 minutes later, I couldn't get up off the chair, and I finally was able to get up, and I felt really weird, and all of a sudden, it felt like there was 2 people inside of me, and I could actually feel them and feel its feelings.
All right. This is going to seem like a rude question, Mary, but
okay.
I'm going to ask it. How do you know it wasn't all in your head?
Because you know what, it felt like my body was just overstuffed, and plus I had all of this energy just flowing through my body.
I know, I've got all that. But I mean, how do you know that it was sourced out? How do you know that it really was aliens? Now you say you saw Greys,
if I had not saw them, had I not seen them, I would have thought maybe it was just some bizarre episode. But I don't know how else to explain it.
Could it have been a bizarre episode accompanied by something in your imagination? Could that be? Or what? Was there any way for you to discern that you were fully conscious? Reach down, pinch yourself, whatever. I
was walking around. I actually went outside, and I was walking around. I was talking to my husband, but I was also experiencing this. How else do you explain something else being in your body? It's hard to explain. I don't know.
What do you think the intent was of what was done to you? Why? Any idea? Guess?
What I understand is that I could tell I'll just call it a he, had never experienced the human physical body before. He seemed somewhat maybe more dimensional. Maybe that's why he hadn't. he just seemed so amazed with
So at the time
petting the dog and petting the cat. And,
got it. At the time that he was in you, so to speak, or meshed with you, not only was he detecting you, but you were detecting his feelings as well.
Yeah, and that is how I know that there was somebody inside of me. Not only that, you could physically see. I mean, my husband was looking at me, and I mean, I was looking at myself in the mirror. I mean, my eyes felt like they were bulging out, and my face just was different.
What did your husband have?
See it.
Well, yeah, what did he have to say about all of this?
He didn't quite. He believed me. Because I've had other things happen. I mean, before, but he believes me. I mean, he really believed me, and there was no doubt about it that something just amazing was happening, and I don't know how else to, what else to say about it. It was a great, unique experience, and I have to say that very, very benevolent, kind.
Okay. That's
thing inside of me.
That's what I wanted. Benevolent and kind. So you felt all of that there wasn't any, I don't know.
No intrusion.
Yeah.
There was none of that. It was like a child touching things and walking for the first time. So it was really a unique experience for me too.
Well, that's a very interesting description, like a child doing something for the first time. That's what it would be like too.
He was very worried about scaring my husband and scaring my son. I actually kept turning away from my son because I looked so bizarre at the time.
All right. As with most who have had this kind of experience, apparently, and you said it, it's happened to you before. Maybe not exactly this.
That's the only time that had happened. I've had other contacts with aliens, and I've woken up on ships and things like that. But this is really a unique.
Is there anything
experience.
else? It's an opportunity. An awful lot of people listening. You had real contact. Was there any message or any understanding that you gleaned from these beings in any of your encounters that would be important to pass along to the audience?
Well, a lot of the encounters that I had, I only remember bits and pieces, and I had a lot of anger and hostility. So I'm really kind of shocked that in these last years I've had really great experiences with them, and all I have to say is that they were the Greys, and these ones were really nice. I can't say that for all of them, but.
Do you think the early bad experiences that you had were only bad because you were frightened, or do you think they really were bad, in perspective, looking back?
You hit it right on the head, Art. I think that's what it was. I was so afraid. Actually, what I did was I was so afraid of them, and I was so angry at being abducted all the time that I just said out loud, come to me during the day and I won't be afraid. If you just do, you scare me at night. And when I said that, I started having these great daytime experiences. So, I don't know what else, that happened. Maybe it'll help other people, maybe if they do that.
Do you think this is really common, Mary? Do you think a lot of people are having these experiences? Have you met anybody else who is?
Not that kind of an experience. Not where they've come right inside your body. I've never heard of that.
Well, yeah,
but I know,
you know what, I haven't
people
either.
have had good experiences.
I've never heard of it either, Mary. But the odds are, now that you have told this story, trust me, I'll bet you a whole bunch of light bulbs went on out there, and there's people trying to dial saying, that happened to me too. Anyway,
I hope they do.
Yep, and I really appreciate your calling. So there's no overall message that you got, Mary, that people should know about. I mean, are you ready to say, don't worry, they're friendly?
Well, I don't know all of them, so I couldn't honestly say that. I'm happy I met some that were nice. I can't speak for all of them, but the ones I've been meeting lately are very nice. So
again,
I got no direct message from him when he was inside of me. He was there to just experience.
No big Earth straighten out or else kind of message, right?
No, no.
Okay, Mary. Thank you for calling. Peter, I look around the world and I read all these stories and read them to my listeners, and to me it seems as though the process is accelerating. You know, this Kilimanjaro thing, just the latest of a long string of stories. I mean, go talk to the Eskimos. Boy, is that scary stuff. What's going on up in Alaska. With the rate of acceleration of all of this, do you want to make any scientific guesses, Peter, about where we're headed and how soon we might get there?
Well, I just parrot what I've heard from our best climate modeler at the University of Washington. He's a guy named David Battisti, and he does the mathematical modeling of what happens to atmospheres as you warm them, and he's an expert at world climate models. So he's a guy who's really looking forward, and he uses the computer models to predict in the future using past data in the past.
Yes.
And his bottom line is that we will have 1,000 parts per million carbon dioxide in the atmosphere in 100 to 150 years.
Huh.
We have 360 right now, going to 380. But the point is that the last time we had 1,000 ppm was the Eocene epoch. This was right after the age of dinosaurs. The entire world was a jungle. I mean, this was a world that was absolutely jungle from pole to pole.
Huh.
We had crocodiles and palm trees in Washington State at that time. We have plenty of fossils of them. I take my kids up, and they go, wow, Hawaii and Washington. Well, Seattle hasn't had a good palm tree in 60 million years, but we'll have them in 100 years if this guy is correct.
In 100 years?
100 years, we're looking at a world warm enough that Washington State has palm trees and crocodiles. And I don't mind palm trees and crocodiles, but here's what I really mind. I don't want malaria, dengue fever, Ebola, and all the other goodies that the tropics have. That's the whirlwind that we reap.
Yes. And in 100 years, let's move north a little bit into Canada and the Yukon and Alaska. What's that going to look like in 100 years?
Well, you certainly have no glaciers. You're going to find a very rapid change in vegetation. I mean, those places have really scrub spruce, and they have Sitka spruce. They've got all these trees that are really adapted to cold and to dry, because so many of the Yukon, those areas are very dry, of course. They get snow, but it's not a lot of rainfall. Rainfall patterns change. It gets warmer and wetter, and probably you start getting cedar and Douglas fir up there, so you're going to have a change of our vegetation sort of in the Washington State region way up north. But the bad news is that high CO2 has been found to work really badly with our crops. Corn and wheat reduce their yields in higher CO2. That's bad news.
How much of a factor do you think that man's presence is in worsening the situation that's underway anyway?
Well, that's a question I get all the time. I mean, people say, well, you know, you have this extinction of 250 million years ago, and you say that volcanic activity caused it. Well, there's no humans back 250 million years ago, so what?
Right.
But the point is that the volcanoes are still doing their thing today, and they have been forever.
Right.
So we have all this natural CO2 coming from the volcanoes. So it's not as if we're putting out the majority of CO2. It's just our SUVs and our industries putting enough extra out there.
So are we a factor? Yes
or
no? Yeah. Oh, yes, you
Totally.
said. Totally, huh?